This is the Canley Files. Real courtrooms, real people, real cases. Every episode, we bring you inside Canadian courtrooms, where lives change in a moment and justice is decided. No actors, no fiction, just the truth, told in full. These are real cases, drawn straight from the official court records. Let's begin. It was a quiet winter morning in Winnipeg, Manitoba. January 14th, 2020. Inside the Manitoba Court of Appeal, the atmosphere was solemn. Not tense, just heavy. The kind of heaviness that settles in when a case isn't just about legal arguments or sentencing ranges, but about something harder to explain. Why a man with no history of violent outbursts would stab a child for no reason, and what society is supposed to do when that happens. At the front of the courtroom, seated behind the long judicial bench, were three judges. Justice Christopher J. Manella presided over the hearing. To his left sat Justice Karen A. Simonson, and to his right, Justice Michelle A. Monin. They were not unfamiliar with serious cases, but this one stood apart. Not because of the legal complexities, but because of the sheer absence of explanation. The man appealing his sentence, Maksym Kravchenko, sat quietly in the accused box. He was 41 years old. His posture was still. He looked straight ahead. His hands were cuffed loosely in front of him. There was no outburst, no protest, just a vacant expression, like someone who had accepted long ago that he didn't belong anywhere. To his right was his lawyer, Chad Olson, ready to argue that the 10-year sentence imposed on her client was excessive. Across the aisle, representing the Crown, stood R.D. Lajimodiri, prepared to argue otherwise, or at least to defend the sentence as legally valid. This wasn't a retrial. The facts of what happened weren't in dispute. The only question was, did the punishment fit the crime? The life of Maksym Kravchenko. To understand why this case left even experienced judges struggling, you have to understand who Maksym Kravchenko was. He was born in Ukraine, into a life that was difficult from the start. His parents were alcoholics. He grew up in an environment where emotional needs weren't ignored, they were punished. According to the psychological reports later submitted to the court, Kravchenko was subjected to physical abuse. He was also a victim of sexual abuse as a child. There were no reports, no interventions. Nothing about his life suggested safety or care. By the time he was an adult, Maksym had trained in construction. It was a practical career, not an expressive one. He didn't build relationships. He didn't have hobbies. He worked. In 2013, he immigrated to Canada with his wife and young daughter, hoping perhaps that a different country might mean a different life. They settled in Winkler, Manitoba, a quiet, largely conservative town. But that hope didn't last. In 2014, his marriage ended following an incident of domestic violence. The next year, he was convicted of assault. His sentence was light, a $400 fine and 1 year of probation. But the consequences were heavier. His family life ended. He lost regular contact with his daughter. He was, from then on, alone. By 2017, Maksym was working construction jobs for a Russian-speaking employer, one of the only people he regularly communicated with. He spoke little English and had no close friends. He didn't engage with the community. He lived in social isolation. A psychiatrist would later describe his lifestyle as emotionally flat and dangerously cut off from others. There was no record of mental illness, no diagnosis of psychosis, no delusions. But he was clearly unwell, depressed, disconnected, and unable to explain his emotions, even to himself. When asked why he committed the act, he told the psychiatrist that he was tired, that his mood was bad, and that he felt a heaviness. No motive, no target, no warning signs anyone saw in time. The girl who was attacked was 15 years old. She had gone to church with her family that morning, like she always did. The building was full. Over 700 people attended the service. She didn't know Maksym. They had never spoken. They never exchanged a look. There was no connection between them at all. She was simply washing her hands in the women's washroom after the service ended. And he walked in. According to court records, Kravchenko had momentarily stepped outside after the service, waiting in his employer's vehicle. He had realized he still had his folding knife in his pocket, a tool he used at work. Then, for reasons still unknown, he got out of the car, re-entered the building, and walked calmly to the washroom. He pulled out the knife. He stabbed the girl in the back. When she turned to face him, confused and in pain, he stabbed her again, this time in the abdomen. He also slashed her left arm. There were other women present in the washroom, including one who was with her 2-year-old granddaughter. Everyone ran. Kravchenko didn't. He folded the knife, placed it back in his pocket, walked out of the washroom, and blended in with the crowd. Then he returned to the vehicle outside. He sat still, staring forward. When the police arrived, they found him there. The knife was in his pocket. It still had blood on it. He confessed immediately. He said he didn't know her, that there was no plan, that it could have been anyone. The girl survived, but only barely. She was airlifted to Winnipeg, her internal injuries described as life-threatening. At one point, she told her family that she thought she was going to die, and that she was ready. She underwent emergency surgery. She spent weeks in recovery. She had to learn to walk again. Today, she lives with permanent scarring, chronic pain, and the psychological effects of the trauma. She cannot go out in public without a trusted adult. She avoids crowded spaces. She remains deeply anxious, especially in buildings that are supposed to feel safe. At sentencing, she submitted a victim impact statement, along with 24 other members of the church and community. Some spoke of panic attacks, others admitted that they had stopped attending public events. The church itself had to install surveillance cameras, security mirrors, and two-way radios for volunteers. The sense of safety had been shattered. At the first sentencing hearing, the Crown asked for 6 years of imprisonment. The defense asked for 4. But the judge, unable to reconcile the randomness and cruelty of the act, gave 10. She acknowledged that Kravchenko showed no remorse, no insight, and had provided no explanation. She concluded that the moral culpability was high, and that the sentence needed to reflect deterrence, denunciation, and public protection. But now at the Manitoba Court of Appeal, that decision was under review. Justice Minella explained that while the offense was serious and the impact on the victims severe, a 10-year sentence fell outside the accepted range for this type of offense. Cases like R.V. Khan and R.V. Beardy had involved random stabbings of strangers and yet resulted in sentences between 4 and 8 years, even when victims were permanently injured. He emphasized that the purpose of sentencing is not simply to punish, but to ensure proportionality, consistency, and rational application of the law, the final decision. And so, after reviewing all of the facts, precedents, and assessments, the court issued its decision. The sentence of 10 years was reduced to 8, before credit for the time Kravchenko had already served in custody. The court upheld the seriousness of the offense. But it also recognized that sentencing is not about emotion. It's about measured response, even in cases that evoke deep anger. Kravchenko remained silent throughout. He was led out of the courtroom without speaking. There were no words that could change what had happened. Conclusion: this was not a story about hate. It wasn't about ideology or mental illness or revenge. It was a story about a man who, by his own account, felt nothing until he felt something unbearable, and then acted in a way no one saw coming. It was also the story of a child who should have been safe but wasn't. The justice system responded as best it could with the tools it has, with logic, with law, and with restraint. But even with all that, the question still echoes: why did it happen? And the silence that follows, that part is still unanswered. Ramno